Welcome to the Regen Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, we have Allie O'Brien, who is the Vice President of Marketing at Harmless Harvest. Harmless Harvest is supporting regenerative agriculture with its Regenerative Organic Certified coconut supply chain, which is now making its way into label claims across their product portfolio. In this episode, we learn about Harmless's unique supply chain in Thailand, sourcing the Nam Ham coconut, their work implementing regenerative agriculture practices on the ground through their RECAP program, how their regenerative organic sourcing is coming to life in product marketing today and in the future, plus the support they're receiving from their parent company, Danone. Get your notepads out, folks, because Allie was dropping straight knowledge on this episode. It was super interesting and informative to have our first VP of marketing on the show, and Allie went in depth on all things related to creating meaningful marketing strategies for regenerative claims, whether we're talking certifications, packaging design, claims hierarchy, pricing architecture, in-store promotion, channel-specific execution, and so much more. Let's dive in. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. Very excited today to have our friend Allie from Harmless Harvest joining us. So welcome, Allie.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. And I'm flying solo, as our regular listeners will probably attest, because Kyle's usually talking at this point of the episode. But really excited about this one. Allie and I had a really, really good introductory / kind of prep call. And I think she's going to bring a lot of really keen marketing insights as our first kind of VP of marketing to join the podcast. So excited to have you. For those that don't know much about Harmless Harvest, which I'm sure is not many, Allie, but give us the lay of the land. You know, what kind of products do y'all make? Where can people find your products today in terms of stores?
Yeah, absolutely. So Harmless Harvest is an organic coconut products company. We're probably most famous for our coconut water that launched about 13 years ago and has been gaining a ton of loyalty and rabid fans ever since. So we can talk about, why our coconut water is so great and so special. It's the pink one. For those who maybe aren't familiar with the brand name, we get a lot of recognition for being the pink coconut water. But we think it tastes as straight from the coconut as you can get. And so it's really crisp and refreshing, has those natural electrolytes. But as a mission-driven company, we've been looking for ways to upcycle and use more of the beautiful coconuts that we harvest for our water. And so that's really been the innovation pipeline and machine for us as we looked to launching smoothies that upcycled the coconut meat and yogurts that upcycled the coconut meat, and really trying to use that whole coconut. So we also make non-dairy coconut yogurts, non-dairy coconut smoothies, and a drinkable non-dairy yogurt as well.
Yeah, I love it. It's been exciting to see the product development pipeline kind of come to life. I had to get off dairy or conventional dairy, at least for a little while, from an inflammation and gut perspective as I healed from an autoimmune disease. And so a lot of things coconut based were my replacement. And it was fun to kind of start consuming some of those other products as they came on board, especially the yogurt. Yeah. I think I've consumed my fair share of yogurt. I would love for you to tell the audience the origin story, but I want to ask a random question because I drink a lot of coconut water, and I find that Harmless does have a very distinct and unique taste. And you were kind of alluding to it there, obviously with the different color. Is that because of the coconuts where they're sourced, the manufacturing? Like we're getting out of order here, but I'm too curious not to ask that question.
Yeah, for sure. So all coconut water would turn naturally pink over time if it's processed in a certain way. So it's clear when we extract it and when we bottle it, and then it turns naturally pink over time. And that's because we microfilter instead of thermally pasteurizing or acidifying the product. So there's a number of ways that you can get to, a sterile, clean, safe product. And we wanted ours to be as minimally harsh on the product as possible, because that's what preserves that straight from the coconut taste, or keeps that straight from the coconut taste. And so our process preserves that natural pinking process that would happen, and locks in, we think, just that excellent taste while making it safe to drink.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, this theme comes up over and over again on the podcast, which is like the regenerative production doesn't stop at the farm gate. It continues into the manufacturing because a lot of those things that happen on the farm, if you're investing in regenerative agriculture, they need to be maintained through the manufacturing process. So we have, I don't know, it almost feels like I think this is episode 73 or 74. And it's like almost every single episode, we have some kind of example there. But I think you mentioned 13 years. So it hasn't been a super long time for the brand, but that's a decent spell in CPG. And we know there's been quite a lot of growth and a lot of fun stuff along the way. So fill the audience in just on a little bit of the history and kind of the origin story of the brand, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, the processing and the natural pinking that I talked about is in some ways part of that origin story. So our founders about 15 years ago set out not to create the best tasting coconut water, but to disrupt a supply chain and disrupt a business model through conscious capitalism. So that was the ultimate goal that they had set out with. And they were scouring the world for products and supply chains that they could do that to. And they were actually in Brazil trying acai products when they drank the coconut water straight from the coconut and were like, wait a second, this tastes so much better than the stuff that you can buy bottled. Like, light bulb moment, we should be trying to find a way to make coconut water that actually tastes like drinking straight from the coconut. And so then they scoured the world for the best tasting coconuts, found those in Thailand. We are single sourced. The Nam Ham coconut is the only coconut that we use in our coconut water. That name in Thai means fragrant ones. So they're known for being really sweet and light and fragrant. And we think just the best tasting. And so from there, it was off to the races of, how can you bottle this in a way that preserves that straight from the coconut taste? And that's where the microfiltration piece was really critical in preserving those taste elements and those taste notes. So started selling about 13 years ago. And the company has grown a ton. I think we've tripled in size since I've been here in the last 5 years. We know that consumers are incredibly loyal once they try us because our taste is so differentiated from what's on the market. And then we think our loyalty is also driven in part by the mission and sustainability elements that have been consistent throughout our business life. We were constantly looking for ways to do things better, and regenerative is only the latest and greatest piece of that journey.
Yeah, I think the audience is going to learn a lot because you have a really unique kind of perspective, having been there for the last 5 years, as y'all have tripled in size and growth. We know Danone's been involved as an investor and now owns the brand, but kind of leaves y'all alone, I think is the way you articulated to me on the last call. So I think that's an interesting dynamic. And then also you as the marketer has kind of been a part of this process where they've always been sourcing from these regenerative systems. But I think the way that y'all were branding and telling that story was initially, what was it called? Recaps? Or what was the acronym that was originally used?
Yeah, Recap, the Regenerative Coconuts Agriculture Project. So that was kicking off right when I started, and happy to sort of talk about why we invested in that and what our regenerative journey has been, if that makes sense at this time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
And I think it's like interesting going from that to now being rock certified. And then so what was the past? What kind of was that journey like? What does the future look like? Getting the lowdown on all of that, I think would be really good insights for everybody.
Yeah. So I think there's an interesting story about just coconut farming in Thailand in general, in that organic doesn't necessarily command a price premium, which is wild.
That's interesting.
And that's, it's because China is such a big market mover. They buy a ton of Nam Ham coconuts as well. And so if we go in and say, hey, we'll pay 10%, 20%, whatever premium for organic, China will just come in and say, fine, we'll pay that for conventional. And so you just have this constant escalation.
Wow.
And so we've had to work really hard to keep our farmers interested in organic, and our agronomists on the ground do an amazing job of keeping that network super strong and scaling it for our growth. But there's an element of, we need to create a financial incentive to farm better. Organic alone doesn't necessarily create that. And then you layer on the fact that drought, which is cyclical in Thailand with the El Nino. So we're hopefully getting to the end of a drought year this year. Creates fewer coconuts per tree and fewer milliliters per coconut. And we know we face this on a cyclical nature. So how can we climate proof, because organic doesn't really touch the climate element? How can we touch our farms in a climate positive way that makes them more resilient to climate change and therefore creates this financial incentive. Like at the end of the day, our farmers are going to need this financial incentive to opt in when the market structures aren't necessarily there otherwise. And so our goal and where we initially launched with Recap was, okay, what does a regenerative model for coconut farming look like? How can we entice farmers to adopt that? Let's go and study the various regenerative practices, see which ones have the best, financial impact, whether that be through greater yields or additional revenue streams. That was the ultimate goal. And so about 5 years ago, the team was like, okay, let's go give farmers compost. Let's go give them some intercrops. Let's go give them some cover crops and just subsidize it for them and see how things go. And our board at the time said, well, okay, wait a minute. The Danone Ecosystem Fund has actually funded an organic strawberries project in Morocco that looked at providing inputs to those farmers and helping provide the education and the training. Why don't we see if there's funding to do something for regenerative agriculture in Thailand? And so we said, okay, that actually sounds like a great idea. Let's cost share some of these learnings. And so we wrote a concept note, got that approved, and then Recap kicked off in 2020. And we started with 10 farmers in our pilot program across, I think, like 7 different types of regenerative practices. We ultimately scaled that to 350 farmers. There was lots of other learnings and developments along the way. I think we created 3 different formulas for on-farm compost, among many other things beyond just enrolling and engaging farmers in the program. And then it concluded last year, and we actually made all those learnings and materials open source. So those are available in both English and in Thai for anyone who wants them. And now we're in the next phase of, okay, how can we scale this? How can we continue to drive that financial incentive for farmers? Because I think there's still work and learnings to be done there.
Yeah. Oh my God. I have like 14 bullet points popping into my head. I have no idea where to go. That was so good and such a good overview. And I love, like, your articulation sounded like it sounded like your role was director of ops or director of supply chain. Like, that's how in depth you understood it. And well, I just appreciate that, like, coming from the VP of marketing. And I feel like a lot of times any brand above a certain size, people want to automatically hit the easy button of like, oh, this is just like marketing propaganda BS. They don't actually do this work. They don't know what they're talking about. It's not like you guys are humongous, but you guys are a scaled brand, And so I think it's easy a lot of times to look at things that way. And it's very clearly not the case here. And so I really just like respect and admire that. The other thing that really stood out to me was this continues to be a recurring theme of the on-farm profitability, right? Which is, we have the certification programs. We have some brands that are getting a price premium for their products that are certified. We can say there's correlation there, but I don't think we can say there's causation there yet. So, we can't really for sure say there's a regenerative premium yet. We know there's an organic premium in the macro that didn't apply to this supply chain. So you have all these factors kind of circling there. And what you end up with is, hey, we can get these practices implemented by making it more profitable for the farmer, which I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of kind of ways that we can have net positive regenerative impact. But like, that one is always going to move the needle more than any other ones, in my opinion.
Yeah, it has to be motivating, because changing a family farm that's been in the family for generations it's hard to do that just on heartstrings alone, right? So there needs to be an incentive and a financial commitment from a company like us. So helping those farmers go on that journey, and providing the data and the rationale is part of it. But then also, where can we provide support on materials? Where can we enroll farmers in developing that compost, and then connecting them to other farmers to purchase that compost, and just building that network, because the supply chains just aren't there. The food supply chain needs to change, right? Like, if these farmers are going to invest in intercropping, like, we need a food supply chain that's going to offload those intercrops that maybe aren't as scaled as they would be on a monoculture farm, in a way that builds that revenue for those farmers and builds that incentive for them to invest in the intercropping. So it's daunting, but we're super committed. And I think, those that are adopting it are seeing really positive results. And we've now set an audacious goal of what if we could get 50% revenue improvement from regenerative farms? Like that might be crazy. Wow. Maybe we land at 20, maybe we land at 30, but like, let's try and get them 50%. And what do those tactics look like? Where are we going to get the best bang for the buck? There is no silver bullet. It's going to have to be multiple practices, which is better for the earth anyway. But, whether it's coconuts are farmed in canals, which I think is really interesting. So there's, rows of trees, and then in between the rows, there's these water canals. And that's because we harvest young coconuts. And so if they were to fall onto the ground when you cut them off, they would bruise and damage. And so they drop into the water and then they collect in the canals. It's really cool. We actually just refreshed our mission webpage on our website yesterday. And so there's a lot of great new imagery that the team captured from some of our regenerative photo shoots. But these beautiful canals. But we actually learned that 46% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the coconut farms themselves, which I think blows people's minds. You're like, how can the farm be this? Like, you're shipping coconut water from Thailand to the US. Surely it's your shipping. And it's like, actually logistics are like 5% of our emissions. But what's happening is all of the plant waste is falling into the canals and then decomposing and releasing methane, or you have other farm waste on the property that's not necessarily being utilized well and decomposing and causing emissions. And so how do we introduce fish into the canals to control some of that waste, to control the duckweed as well, and help make sure that the erosion elements and all of, like, just a completely healthy ecosystem. And then the farmers can sell the fish, right? Like, how can we think about complete circularity on the farm in ways that help us achieve our regenerative goals, but also help us achieve our climate goals? Because we do believe that regenerative agriculture is going to be a huge enabler for us in reaching net zero, which is our ultimate climate goal.
Yeah. So many, once again, so many things to unpack there. I think one thing that's interesting is it's really about waste mitigation and upcycling of waste more than it's like the actual agriculture practices or that net GHG issues. So that's super interesting. And then another interesting piece here is, like, Danone's been on y'all's cap table. They own y'all now. Like we said, I think they're pretty hands off, but they've clearly supported these projects and this work. So we'd love for you to just talk through the journey of maybe their input and support along the way in the work that y'all have done on Regen Ag.
Yeah, Danone has been a great partner. They've really understood where they can provide support and where it makes sense to leave the brand alone and let Harmless be harmless and do what it does best. So I'm super grateful for that. But yeah, the Danone Ecosystem Fund 50% co-funded the recap project, and then was there along the way providing resources. We don't have a dedicated, at least in the US, a dedicated sustainability person, right? There's definitely a big team in Thailand, and we do have a sustainability manager there, but there's not a huge part of the organization that works on these things as their single day job. It's something that we do because we love it or we're passionate about it. And so Danone was able to provide a lot of expertise, people whose full job is sustainability and they live and breathe that. And so there was a lot of great, subject matter expertise that they were able to bring to the project and provide along the way, and general support. So that was really welcomed and really appreciated.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I mean, it's great to see, like, we have, I think, everyone at this point making big net zero commitments or regenerative agriculture commitments. And the fact that this project was not only financially supported, but categorized and summarized, and that is open source, I think is really cool. And you've already given us a ton of kind of nuggets of insight from that already, but anything that was, we'll link it in the show notes, but anything from the recap stuff that's been published publicly that was like super informative, or was something that y'all didn't expect, or was like a really potent learning from all that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that there's no silver bullet was an important learning. I think there was no single, hey, do intercropping and you're good. I think it is powerful, and that lets us know that, like, we've got to just keep moving on all of these things. But we did evaluate the practices against their benefits to the ecosystem, their benefits on the soil, their benefits on climate, and then their financial return for farmers.
Wow.
And I think we did learn that 3 rose to the top and really checked all 4 of those boxes. And that was in turning the farm residue into compost, implementing cover cropping, and then implementing intercropping. I think those were the best bang for the buck that we were able to see. And so those are definitely things that we're continuing to push forward, but it all depends on the farmer's needs, right? We work with over 300 farms. Some of them are small, some of them are bigger. You don't have this overwhelmingly industrialized agriculture in Thailand that you do here in the US. So you really are on the ground working with the individual farms, or our agronomists are, and saying, okay, well, actually, you need more pollinator penetration. And so let's get stingless bees onto your property. Let's look at vermicompost. Maybe those are more impactful for you than the big 3 that work at some of the other farms. So it really is customized, tailored, sort of farm by farm basis. And I think there's beauty in that, but there's, challenges in that too. It's more resource intensive to really bring folks along on the journey.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like y'all have an exceptional data set and really a lot to be proud of in terms of managing that complexity and still having some hard, kind of nice data to back up the work and the future work, right? And what you've learned from it. Y'all are now ROC, you're now Regenerative Organic Certified. I think you told me last time we talked that the seal is just now kind of getting onto some product labels. When did the transition kind of happen from focusing on the Recap project and then turning that into ROC? And what has that journey been like?
Yeah, for sure. So Recap wound down in August, I believe, of 2023. And so it was this, what's next question. And we'd always had our eye toward certification and thinking that would be something that would be impactful and really help us celebrate all the efforts that we've made. And so in October, we did our audit and we're certified at the bronze level. I was really encouraged to read the audit report and see that we're actually meeting gold in a ton of the areas. Wow. And then, we have a number of areas where we're bronze. And so those will be areas that we continue to work as will just overall farmer enrollment and implementation. And we have a goal of 100% coconuts from regenerative practices by 2030. So
nice.
That goal line keeps moving from a quantity standpoint as the business keeps growing so successfully. So our team is like, okay, this is really ambitious, even though it maybe seems like that's, 6 years to do it. It's like, but it's getting more and more each year. And so we conducted the audit in October, passed at the bronze level. We're super proud of that. I think we have 78% of our farms are engaging into at least 2 regenerative practices, which is amazing. I think 43% of them have cover crops. So just some really cool statistics that were able to come out of that, and decided, okay, we want to put this on packaging. We ultimately decided to put it on the side panel of our bottles. We just have more room for exposition there. I think one of the challenges that we think we face is consumer understanding, or we know we face is consumer understanding of regenerative organic. And so we wanted that space to do some education. So we put it on the side of the panel. We wrote a paragraph about what regenerative agriculture means, how we're on this journey. And then we have a QR code that links to our new webpage, which goes into as much detail as a consumer could possibly want about regenerative. But we just didn't ultimately feel like we could trade off the space on the front of pack yet for that claim. Regenerative is not as well known as regular organic. We felt it was important to keep that certification on there. We're Fair for Life certified, which we are really proud of, and that's important to have on front of pack. And so my hope is that, we as brands can help educate consumers and do some of that heavy lifting, but that also that the organizations are there along the journey with us and helping create consumer pull for regenerative products, because we're small, we have very low brand awareness, and top of funnel marketing is probably not going to be led by regenerative, right? Like I need people to understand what Harmless Harvest is before I can start talking to them about regenerative. And so I think that the industry and the organizations and the trades can really help create that consumer pull. And so excited to partner with them on that in the future.
Yeah, it feels like that's the next expedition for all of us. And we've been talking about it a lot on the podcast for, years, I guess, maybe plural. And the right order of operations has occurred, which is, hey, we got to get the trade to understand what this term is. We got to have kind of the regen wars about defining and certifying it. I get all that. We have to kind of get those programs established, get the farmers on board, get the brands on board. But I do think we've reached kind of a critical mass in doing that. And now it is time to shift some resources to that consumer education, because what we've seen in the broader regen ecosystem is like Kiss the Ground, Common Ground, Biggest Little Farm, like those have had broad, overarching kind of awareness, but that might not drive direct point of purchase awareness and intent and action. I think I'm going to talk out of two sides of my mouth here. Like, we have to do that. And I think there's wins to be had, but it's still marginal compared to just operating a great CPG brand and the fundamentals. Like, regenerative is always going to be, I think you used a very good marketing terminology. You said it was more of a loyalty and retention play.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. And I think it will always be that, but we still need to invest in seeing how far we can push it as a primary driver, which I don't think it exists at any significance, at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think retailers can be a part of that, that journey for us. I think we've seen Whole Foods make a lot of positive steps in that direction. And we know that brands that benefit the planet and do so through regenerative practices are going to be one of their consideration sets as they look at line reviews, which I think is super great and super important. Like, we should be rewarding the brands that are doing the work and walking the walk and putting our money where our mouth is. So I think it's great to see retailers stepping into that fold, and I hope that more will follow.
Yeah. And I think, once again, it's complex. We appreciate that Whole Foods and other retailers are thinking about it in terms of sourcing. I believe they need to do more in terms of like actual marketing execution in store. Yes. And I'm curious, like, for you as a marketer, what is that? Do you think it's POS? Do you think it's end caps? Do you think it's, shelf talkers? Like, what do you see as leverage points to bring that consumer education more into the retail environment?
Yeah, I definitely think POS needs to be a big part of it. I think that in general, there isn't a ton of POS at Whole Foods. Yeah. And so that's a huge benefit to brands. And I think that that's something that they can attract brands with is, hey, you'll get this POS benefit if you have a regenerative story to tell. We reserve our POS for things like regenerative or bigger investments and bets, because that is really where the consumer is making a lot of their decision. And so if you have the opportunity to tell that, that sustainability message that maybe is going to tip the scale for them to try you versus someone who hasn't made that investment, I think that's huge and that's powerful. I think that as they think about their, off shelves and some of those really attractive promo periods and who gets selected for those, this kind of criteria can absolutely become a part of that decision making. I think that those kind of incentives would be huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a lot of work to do there. I think our big concern is with the multiple certification programs and even some non-certified claims that are legit. What happens when a consumer is walking down an aisle and they see regenerative in 4 or 5 different products with different expressions of that? How do we not totally kill the term, but also let each individual claim, certification, whatever, express its essence and stand out for what's different about that? That'll just be a collective challenge that I don't think we have an answer to today, but I'm keen to watch it and potentially help solve it if that's a role that we're asked to play.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's still evolving, and I look forward to seeing it play out. I don't think I'm going to be the one to solve it.
Yeah, I think it's going to take all of us for sure. So it's coming to some product packaging. You might have already said this, but if I missed it, I'm sorry. Is it coming to all SKUs, a certain number of SKUs? How did you think about that? Like, I'm curious how that thought process was.
Yeah, so it's coming to most of our coconut water beverages. Okay. So all of our coconuts are regenerative certified at the bronze level, but because of the percentage requirements for labeling, needing to be at that 95% content, that excludes a couple of our SKUs. And we didn't really want to parse things out further and say made with, and sort of the caveats that you need to do when you're below the 95% level. So, I mean, our coconuts are certified at the bronze level. So regardless of what products you're buying, if they have our coconuts in it, you can feel good about that. But from a claims standpoint, and a labeling standpoint, we're putting that on our coconut water, on our sparkling coconut water, on our coconut water with pulp, our coconut water with aloe, which is a huge portion of our portfolio. But it will not be on our yogurts or our smoothies. Although some of our smoothies do meet the requirement. We just haven't touched those labels yet. It's a big project to touch every label in the portfolio, or most of the labels in the portfolio. And so, I think it would be amazing if we could have all of our products certified, but it's tough. I mean, we can't necessarily find Regenerative Organic Certified watermelon juice so that we can get our watermelon coconut water certified, right? Like, those options don't exist for some of our products. It's not just, the fact that we're at the bronze level. It's that there are no other ingredients in some of these categories that we play in that we could get that are Regenerative Organic Certified. So that's something we continue to talk to our partners and sourcing ingredient suppliers about, but it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, it's just that classic like progress over perfection mentality. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because when we started the podcast, we didn't really know what it wanted to become, but it has clearly become this source for more B2B information, because what we're trying to do is like peel back the layers on how complex this work really is. And so I think we take for granted the fact that we walk into a Whole Foods, we grab a Harmless Harvest coconut water off the shelf, and we see the cool new, side panel with the CERT, with the copy, with the QR code, but like the amount of time that goes into designing that, thinking about that, ordering the labels, making sure the labels work, sending the manufacturer the labels for those, that are the same bottle size as the watermelon SKU, but the watermelon SKU is not going to have that label. Like just the, the amount of intricacies and complexity there is really important to note. And I think to understand that, I got some feedback from someone the other day, and they were like, what you're doing on the podcast is showing people how much effort's going into like really building the supply chain and the commercialization piece of this that, the conventional peers to regenerative brands like don't have to do. Right.
I think one of the things I'm most proud of too is that like we don't have to do it either, but we are. Like that's true of like everything that we do from a mission standpoint. Like there's no one saying you have to do this or you won't be on shelf here. But we've made huge investments and huge commitments, whether it's in our packaging format, whether it's in our claims and certification, whether it's our farming practices. I mean, millions and millions of dollars of investment because it's the right thing to do. And we believe in it. But we also believe that business can be better for it. And I think we've proven that, right? Like we have tripled in 5 years while doing all of these things. And I hope that sends a powerful message to other brands. And I hope that consumers, and I think they are starting to wake up, but there is a difference between what they say in polls and surveys about how important a brand's sustainability practices are and how they vote with their pocketbook at shelf. Yep. I think the tide is turning on that, and we'll be, well positioned as it continues to turn. But like you said earlier, like I think loyalty and retention are huge places that we can win with practices like this. If there's a competing product or a semi-competing product, but they're not making these investments, like more and more, this is going to matter to consumers, and more, I think they'll pick us because, okay, I can get this coconut water that doesn't do any of that stuff, or I can get this coconut water that's, close to being, climate neutral or making efforts to be climate neutral. And doing all these great things. And I want to feel good about that. And so the success will follow.
Yeah. And it's super clear that the team's bought in, and y'all are doing some really interesting stuff and cool stuff that maybe doesn't have to be done, but there's a compelling, sense of feeling within the crew that it should and is going to be done. I'm curious what you can share on like the Danone influence there, right? Like they've been on the cap table, now they own the brand. Like we've said a couple of times, they're not micromanaging y'all, but with the impact work, are there high level strategies and commitments affecting 20% of what y'all do? Is it affecting 50% of what y'all do? Like, I'm assuming there's some specific things that you have to do that are aligned with that. And then there's also some independent stuff that y'all just do that you think is right for your brand. So curious what you can share there.
Yeah, I mean, I think Danone is relatively progressive for a big CPG company. And so I'm grateful that that's where we've landed. Danone is B Corp certified. So that's one where it's like, hey, Harmless, like we need you guys to get B Corp certified. We know we'll pass. We feel really good. We actually did the audit a couple of years ago and we were like, okay, like we would pass, but we're Fair for Life. We've got a couple other things going on. Like let's work on those. But now is the time to get B Corp certified to make sure that we're helping Danone reach that 100% of brands in the portfolio goal that they have. And then really it's more about like, what's the right journey for Harmless? And so they've been supportive of the regenerative push. We obviously moved to 100% recycled plastic in all of our bottles. And we felt that was right for a number of reasons, but that's not necessarily because Danone said we needed to do it. It's more about what are the right choices for Harmless as a mission-led brand that maybe sort of spikes above all other brands as far as mission is concerned. But then also, hey, let's make sure that we're getting that B Corp certification just so that we have a clean, even representation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really cool. I have two super nerdy marketing questions that I don't even know if I'll use the formal correct terminology, but I'm going to ask them anyway. One is, as y'all started to think about ROC and implement ROC, like how did that go into price architecture questions for various SKUs is question one. And question two is, when you think about it as a marketer and maybe the differences in how the consumer approaches purchasing like a coconut water versus a yogurt versus a smoothie, has that played into kind of how you've thought through the strategy, both short and long term, of implementing the regenerative messaging in various products because it's a different consumption journey? We know that you're limited by the formulation kind of standards right now, and that's really driven the majority of those decisions. We've heard that, but I'm curious on like price architecture and specific consumption patterns of SKUs, like how that's affected the thought process.
Yeah, those are good questions. And I think you absolutely used correct. Don't be so hard on yourself.
Good.
Pricing, man, what a journey. We are not taking price behind our regenerative actions. I think that part of that speaks to our commitment to these things are good for business. They're not necessarily a thing behind which business can or needs to take price. Like if we're doing this right in the long term, this should be unlocking greater savings for our farmers, therefore greater pricing for us. And, enabling our bottom line through greater access to supply during periods of drought where we don't necessarily see the price spikes that we've normally seen on our inputs. So there is no pricing action behind this journey thus far. And a lot of brands maybe wouldn't approach it that way right now. That's not how we're thinking about it. And I'd love to say that it's because we want to be benevolent and democratize access to regenerative organic products for consumers. And I mean, there's certainly some truth to that, but it's really rooted in our belief that this is what you need to do to drive a successful business. It's not, and it's going to make the business more profitable. And we're not seeing costs rise because of our implementation of regenerative organic practices. Therefore, why would we price it at a premium?
Yeah. And I think the not to cut you off before you get to the second part, but just to interject one piece of feedback, that the valley of death is the hard part, right? So it's very clear in all these systems, we get to an inflection point where it is more profitable, it's more sustainable, the supply chain is more resilient, the farmer's making more money, and maybe that's an oversimplification, but it's that valley of death for a lot of people where we lose them or it doesn't work. And it seems like that valley maybe was not as deep for y'all because the programs and the practices were pretty much all in place, and it was more tweaking than total whole change, changes, which is still great and important. And, But
I mean, I think we benefit to some degree by being a perennial and not an annual, right? Like I think it's certain agricultural systems are going to be much harder to overhaul in a regenerative format, and coconut farming, while not easy, is maybe has fewer hurdles in some of those areas. So
yeah. And to me, it's like, how do we create whatever the liquidity gap is in that valley of death for the commercial businesses around that supply chain to get them through? Because if it is going to end up having all those outcomes, yes, we'll get there eventually. Is that 3 years for some? Is it 10 years for some? Is it 7 years for some? What other factors? And I think we've just clearly seen there's a ton of complexity there, depending on crop, region, brand size, et cetera. So that makes the work that everyone does very hard, but our job's very fun in terms of, the curiosity around those complexities. But yeah, just naming all that.
Totally. Yeah. And then to get to your second question, I think it really does lie in the product composition and the access to some of those other ingredients. I think to some degree, to another degree, beverage is still the biggest portion of our portfolio. And so of course it makes sense to really lean in on that. That's where we have the highest household penetration. That's where we have the greatest brand awareness, and where we think that, us announcing this certification and this progress is going to have the most impact. Not to say yogurt isn't an incredibly fragmented and competitive category. It is, but I think some of the dynamics that drive it are also a little bit different, and consumers maybe don't have mission or things like that quite as top of mind for that kind of purchase. So I do think there is some truth to that. It tends to be a bit more of a price and promotion driven category. In the plant-based side, you tend to see people shopping based on base. So do I want a coconut base? Do I want an almond base? Do I want a cashew base? What have you? And so I think there's room for that to be impactful, but maybe just a little less so. You also just don't have any real estate on a yogurt cup.
Yeah.
That's where the POS could be so helpful, though, from the retailers. It's like, okay, great. Like, give us the ability, because a lot of these things, regenerative included, requires longer form storytelling. This is not the no sugar added claim, right? Like that means something to a consumer in 3 words. Regenerative Organic Certified doesn't mean much right now to consumers in 3 words. And so we need formats where we can do that longer form storytelling and drive that education, drive that impact. And so hopefully we'll see retailers and others lean into providing brands the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's the fine line that we have no idea what's going to happen with, because on one side we want regenerative to have the same resonance and simplicity that gluten-free, keto, whatever, all those more binary, simple claims. But we also see that kind of got organic and non-GMO into trouble, where those claims and some others have been so simplified down that they're very effective and they're very scaled now. But did we lose some of the essence or value along the way? I don't know how we serve both of those, needs with Regen, especially with multiple definitions and certifications. But, we'll obviously have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, we recently did some brand segmentation work, and we threw in a question about whether or not consumers knew what regenerative organic was, and 11%. And this is a subset of premium functional beverage buyers. So not even necessarily your average consumer, and 11%. So that's tough. So there is a lot of work to do to build that meaning. And I think you're absolutely right that let's make the soundbite meaningful, but let's not lose the impact by getting to the soundbite.
Yeah. And that 11% number is actually pretty promising to me with where we're at, because I still think we're so early innings with this. And, I do think I think the competitive advantage that regenerative organic brands have is organic has a known meaning, has a federal standard, and it has a known price premium. So to me, you're starting at the highest point of commercial opportunity in terms of monetizing your regenerative claim. We'll see what happens in the future there. But I think if I'm putting my pure capitalist investor hat on and evaluating things, that's a straight fact. That's inarguable. Okay. Another nerdy marketing question that came up as we were talking through that. Is there any thought given to channel right? Because it sounds like, and my expectation without knowing the answer is a lot of the business is in specialty natural channel, especially on the beverage side. But I assume like y'all have some club business, you have some MULO business as well, probably a decent amount at this point. Like, have y'all thought about how Regen might activate differently by channel?
Yeah, I think we are pretty well penetrated in club and MULO these days, which is great. And I do think that the message to that consumer might be different and less well understood. I think obviously the Whole Foods consumer is going to be your most attuned, and then maybe your Sprouts consumer and your other sort of natural co-op consumer are going to be the most attuned. And you may, at some of those smaller indies, have more of an opportunity to do the POS and do that longer form at shelf communication. It's certainly something that we talk about when we're selling in and talking to customers in the MULO and the club channel. I do wish that there would be more of a pull from them as they consider their sets the way that we're seeing Whole Foods do. But from like an at store or online digital shelf standpoint, regenerative is not right now at the top of our communication priority. We only have, I think, 0.5% unaided brand awareness. And so obviously in that context, it's going to be more of an aided awareness standpoint, but we have a lot of work to do just to get consumers to even know what Harmless Harvest is, what the products are, why they're better, before we can get into how they're better. So it is a lower priority from a comm standpoint, especially as we get into MULO. In club, I mean, you have retailers like Costco to whom sustainability is really important. I feel like I see that more on the packaging side. I would love to start to see that more on some of these other elements beyond just packaging, which packaging is hugely important. But kind of going back to... They just
don't do anything else. It's literally just a product on pallet. So like you don't have, I mean, maybe you could do the sampling.
It's where they can have a huge impact. Like I totally get that. But I think like thinking more about some of the upstream stuff, because as we look at our greenhouse gas emissions, I think only 9% comes from packaging and packaging sources. So yes, like we've moved to recycled plastic. We're constantly reducing cardboard and other forms of packaging in our pallets and our workflow, but we can only touch so much of the pie if we're touching packaging. We can touch so much more if we're touching the farming, if we're touching the coconut waste itself. So would love to see retailers start to bring a slightly broader definition to sustainability in various channels.
That sparked a manufacturing question. Do y'all own manufacturing? Does it happen in Thailand? Does it happen here? Are you doing one part of it, but then co-mans are making like the end products? Like what's the manufacturing layout look like?
Yeah, so we have a facility in Thailand where we punch all the coconuts and extract the coconut water. We hand scoop the coconut meat there. And then we have a third party who bottles it for us in Thailand. And then our yogurt is actually manufactured here in the United States. So we freeze our coconut meat and ship that over and then produce it here. Just yogurts have a much shorter shelf life. So you'd lose pretty much all of that if you're shipping it across the ocean, especially with shipping these days. So
yeah, I know that's been quite fun in a post-COVID and post-Ukraine-Russia conflict environment.
The Suez Canal just keeps cropping up as a challenge, which I didn't have on my bingo card for the year, but here we are.
Yeah. Well, I am just so impressed by kind of the depth and breadth that you're bringing to this conversation in your role. And it's so clear that y'all are interfacing so well cross-functionally as a brand and even probably within that broader Danone universe. So I just think it's really cool. And I commend y'all for that because we can't do this work unless we commit to those kind of habits and activities. I
definitely want to shout out our team in Thailand. There is a huge team over there, a ton of agronomists, a sustainability manager, and other folks that are constantly working on solving these challenges for us and doing so in a way that moves the business forward. I mean, what an amazing challenge to work on, and they do an incredible job. And we have ambitious goals, and they're rising to that. So I definitely want to acknowledge all the amazing work that they do.
Yeah, love that. We've talked a little bit about the future in various points of the conversation, but I want to tee up that question, which is just like, what's coming down the pipeline that you can share the next 3, 5, 10 years? What does the future for Harmless look like? What does the future for how y'all implement regenerative look like?
Yeah. So like I said, 2030, 100% of coconuts from regenerative farms. That's the big ambitious goal. And as we continue to have really healthy growth, that is a really ambitious goal. So that's where we want to go. Obviously, gold certification, I think, kind of comes along with that. But also, what's our part in educating the consumer? How can we be most effective at that? How do we think about that within the marketing funnel and how we're leveraging it? But I think ideally we're getting more Harmless Harvest in people's mouths, and we're doing that through a variety of ways. And I hope regenerative becomes more of the reason that consumers choose Harmless. But at the end of the day, we want to grow and make the business as big as possible because it's going to support these practices. And if those practices then become a greater reason for why consumers are choosing Harmless, all the better. But I think really the push is on, we know we have superior products. We know we make them in a superior way. And the more we can sell, the more good we can do. Like we're constantly plowing that back into the business and trying to achieve that circularity. And ultimately live into that conscious capitalism mission that our founders had 15 years ago. So that's the goal.
Yeah, I love that. And that's, we continue to see that as a theme as well, which it's kind of like, it's definitely important for someone to grade the work that's happening and for someone to try and tie that in to the consumer, which we've talked about both at length in this conversation. But I think what we're missing and where our biggest gap is, which we're hoping to fill with some of the things that we're going to launch soon, is we just need more people supporting the work. Because ultimately, whether it's tied to regenerative or not, if these brands that are doing the work don't have the commercial outcomes to grow, thrive, and survive really at the baseline, they're not going to continue to do it or ever expand it. So love that kind of underpins the whole strategy there. So I think it's the right and needed order of operations.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a super fun conversation, Allie. So informative and insightful. Appreciate it. We'll take it home with the final question that we ask everybody, which is a rather daunting one, but excited to hear your response. It's, how do we get Regen brands to have 50% market share by 2050?
Oh man, 2050. Okay, we have some time.
Yeah, take some time to think. You got some time to implement. Let it sink in.
I mean, I think that one, as like consumers, we need to be voting with our wallets. Like if I'm working on a regenerative brand and I'm not biasing regenerative brands and products in my own purchasing, like we're doomed. So I hope that at a minimum, everyone is living this, breathing this, and buying this, because that's going to create the pull from retailers for more brands to adopt these practices because they're going to see them performing better. Yeah. Another way to drive those velocities on brands like this is seeing, I think there will ultimately have to be some consolidation and some sort of anointing of what the certifying body is and what that certifying seal is, because multiple is only going to create confusion with consumers. And we do need clear, consistent, marching direction. So, not my
I got my popcorn ready for that one to play out. I'm with you, and it's going to be interesting to watch.
But I think that's important. I'm not picking sides. And so I think that will help drive clarity for the consumer, as will that group and various other groups driving consumer education and awareness, and creating that consumer demand at shelf. And then I honestly think at like a policy level, like I would love to see, and this is not my area of expertise, but I would love to see more effort by the USDA. I would love to see, we're seeing Colorado and California try and lead from the front, but like, I don't know how effective they're going to be. Like government is not always, great at leading from the front on these things, but I do think that they can help provide some leadership from a consolidation standpoint, from a clear goalpost setting standpoint, from certainly from an incentives to farmers standpoint. Like The USDA is incredibly well funded. We're giving a ton of subsidies to monoculture, non-organic, industrial agriculture. Where are the dollars for these kinds of transitions and these kinds of programs? That's something that I would love to hear people start talking more about. And I think we can do that. But again, it just it all comes down to creating the consumer demand for these products, because that's what's going to get people to move. And so we need to be living and breathing it. The organizations need to be investing in creating consumer awareness. And then we should all be asking our elected officials what they're doing to support the evolution to regenerative organic agriculture. I don't know that that's a super satisfying answer. There's much like with our regenerative transition on our coconut farms, there's probably no silver bullet. But my God, I hope that we put our money where our mouth is. We live into what we're saying on surveys about how these kinds of things are important. And that at the individual level, through our work or through, the products that we purchase, we're really moving this forward.
Yeah. I mean, those are the three buckets that I think we get the most. And I think they are probably the three most catalytic buckets. It's consumer demand, better industry execution, and policy. A piece on the policy front that I have no idea how to talk about correctly, but is very intriguing to me is, obviously, the USDA's main goal is to support, production agriculture in the United States, but they also do a lot with import-export that I'm not familiar with and don't claim to be an expert on. And so I'm super intrigued by what opportunities are there for brands like Harmless Harvest and many others that source from outside the U.S. but commercialize in the U.S. and support agriculture systems there, especially like in the global South with smallholder farmers, because those commercial enterprises are still based here in the U.S. They still, have a huge economic impact on the states. They're producing products that consumers want and consume at a high level that you can't grow here in the U.S. So I have no idea what we do in the Farm Bill or with the USDA to support more brands like that maybe aren't sourcing from U.S. farmers, but I think that's also super important. And your comments just sparked me to think and get more curious about that. So I'm excited to learn more about that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's very critical.
Yeah. So people that want to check out Harmless more, it's just www.harmlessharvest.com, if I'm remembering correct, right?
That's correct. Or on Instagram and TikTok at Harmless Harvest.
Cool. Thanks so much for joining us, Allie. This was awesome. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. I had a great time.
For show notes, episode transcripts, and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also find our Regen recaps on the website. Regen recaps take less than 5 minutes to read and cover all the key points of the full hour-long conversations. You can check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe to future episodes, and share the show with your friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Regen Brands Podcast, brought to you by the Regen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.